Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up, and make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and this title is not clickbait. I promise, it is not clickbait. It actually happens. It is Nightmare facing off against the Living Tribunal and Eternity and Galactus and the Celestials and the whole 9 yards. Now, you're probably asking yourself, how in the world did Nightmare become powerful enough to even stand a chance against these guys? Well, I'll tell you exactly how. He beefed up his abilities using Skillshare. So Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creators and curious people. You can explore new skills, develop existing ideas, and get lost in creativity. One of my absolute favorite courses is Productivity for Creatives by Thomas Frank, and we actually follow each other on Twitter, which is awesome. But Thomas Frank is a YouTuber who has a course on Skillshare. This includes things like time management, being able to categorize your different projects and make it all make sense so you can get things done in a timely fashion. Lord knows Comics Explained needed it for a long time. So the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, and after that, it's only around $10 a month. But whether you're looking to fend off boredom, focus on self-care through creativity, or join a similarly creative community, Skillshare is the place to keep you learning. So make sure you guys check out my link in the description, and make sure you guys get your free trial to Skillshare. So having said all of that, we will find out exactly how Nightmare was able to do that in due time. But here's the thing about this comic, and this is one of these things where I'm going to reach out to you guys and ask you guys whether or not you want to see it. And I won't do all of them, but I'll do some of them because some of them are just really bad. So this is what we call a showcase comic. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, and you may have heard us mention that in the past, we talked about things like DC Showcase and stuff like that. This is more or less a similar thing, albeit from Marvel Comics. And the reason why is because this features stories that belong to other characters. And I'll tell you where these stories kind of interject, you know, as we get through this. But the way this kind of kicks off is you have Nightmare just sort of appearing here. Now, the portion that we're covering, which is called Overture, this is drawn by Alex Ross, for those of you guys who are curious about the artist. And Alex Ross is like the comic book artist, right? He's one of my favorite, probably my single favorite comic book artist of all time, outside of like Esad Ribic or Jim Chung, right? He's ridiculously good. But you basically have Nightmare kind of riding through here, through this realm that we can only really presume to be the dream dimension, and is just kind of like, you know, this is a place where I effectively control dreams, right? Or at least I am able to manipulate and use the power of dreams. And we actually get this really cool depiction of what his realm looks like. And this is one of the things that you don't really see all too often in Marvel Comics. You do from time to time, but it's basically just tons and tons of faces of people who were just sleeping, right? Now, for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with Nightmare, one, I already have a video about Nightmare Explained, and then two, I can give you kind of a brief rundown here, and then you can reference the video if you want to see more. So Nightmare is what we call one of the Dream Lords, and in reality, he's probably the most powerful of the Dream Lords. But the basis behind Nightmare is he basically garners his power or feeds off the energy of people as they dream, right? Whether they're having nightmares or they're having peaceful dreams, he's empowered by them nonetheless. Now, as you would expect, if like the entire world fell into a slumber, then Nightmare would remain powerful, or probably be even more powerful, right? Because the reality is his power is limited. And the reason why is because we as human beings do not sleep 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We only sleep for about 7 to 8 hours a day, or if you're a college kid, more like 2. So because of that, you know, his power is limited insofar as how much dream energy he's able to attain from people. But what's going on here is things have changed. Things are different. And the result is that his power is currently being amplified. And so what he's kind of doing here is he basically says, like, when your world sleeps, the dream energy is mine for the taking. And yet, like those in your world, I have imagined having more. So I decided to do something about it. And now I have the best of all possible worlds. And so what we end up finding out here is that Nightmare has instigated what he considers to be a hostile takeover. That here in the world, everybody sleeps all the time, right? They're just constantly sleeping. Now, here's the important thing about this. This story didn't simply come out of nowhere, right? It wasn't something that like Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross just thought of all of a sudden. This is a story that actually kind of had its beginnings back in Captain America Volume 3 in the late 1990s. And the idea behind that story is that Nightmare tried to do exactly this. He tried to instigate a set of circumstances where everybody in the world, all the normal humans, all the superpowered beings, the whole 9 yards, where they would just be sleeping all the time, and that would be it. Now, it wasn't successful. In this instance, it appears that it is. And so the result of that is that it basically feeds him, it strengthens him. And he even says that. He says, do you understand? Every fragment of every subconscious is mine to control. Every dream of love or fear or comfort or escape feeds me, strengthens me. It makes me hungry for more. come, let us have a taste of this one. Now, this is where the showcase element begins to come into play, and this is why things are a little wonky. So what this is designed to do is basically give us as the reader a depiction of different writers and different artists from Marvel Comics in terms of what their skill set is. Now, not to discredit those writers and those artists, we're not really going to cover these just because of the fact that some of these are super in-depth. And because of that, like each one of these could be its own video. And so literally this story arc would end up being something like, like 4 hours long, right? Which I'm not really interested in doing unless we end up doing like a full story video where we combine a whole bunch of smaller stories into one big story. But that's really what's kind of happening here, is that Nightmare is essentially taking somebody on a kind of tour of these various dreams that individuals are having while they're in their dream state. Now, the important thing to also understand, there's not really anything of significance that comes out of these stories involving these dreams, right? So it's not as though it kind of leads into the ending of all this, at least not that I'm aware of. And if there is, we'll kind of go back and we'll cover it once we get to the actual conclusion of the main story, because this is only really the first part. We're only about 4 or 5 issues out and we have 1 issue left, which I thought would be kind of fun to cover. The thing about this is that the person Nightmare is basically talking to is Stephen Strange. That Stephen Strange is the lone survivor out there, right? And seemingly somewhere along the line when all this began to happen, Stephen Strange went into his corporeal state, right? Believing that either Nightmare or some other force was behind it. Now, one of the crazy things, and this is kind of important here, we don't really get a lot of indication about what happened beforehand, right? All we really know is that it was essentially Stephen Strange that made it possible. And this comes by way of Nightmare. He says, ironically, I was able to conquer the living realm because of you. As Sorcerer Supreme, you have a mystic connection to all living things. And now, Stephen Strange, every dream, every dreamer in this world belongs to me, including you. And that's a cool thing here. It's kind of ironic to see that Doctor Strange is his real first enemy that he ever faced off against, and probably one of the most powerful enemies that he has is a guy that basically used him for his own ends, to essentially take over the entirety of the waking world, to put it into sleep and to call it a day. Now, a lot of you guys might be kind of asking yourself the question, like, how could this possibly work? So one thing to understand about Nightmare is that in terms of his power set, he is the most powerful in his own realm, but he manipulates energy and magic, just like almost anybody else. It's not necessarily in the same capacity as Dormammu, and even in the realm of magic, you do have a hierarchy there. The hierarchy is usually a loose hierarchy because of the fact that people's abilities and their achievements change so frequently because they're invoking magic. But say, for example, somebody like Dormammu versus somebody like Sidorak. We could make the legitimate argument there that Sidorak is far and away more powerful than Dormammu. Why? Because Dormammu references the spells of Sidorak, but it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Just because of the fact that Dormammu uses spells that belong to Sidorak does not mean that Dormammu is less powerful than Sidorak. It seems to be the case, but it's not necessarily an absolute case, because it could be that Sidorak knows spells that Dormammu does not. Now, all that would indicate that it is based on knowledge, but Dormammu himself is what we call a Faltine, right? He's literally a being composed of pure magic. So I don't know how you become more powerful than a person who is composed of pure magic. You'd think they'd be able to do pretty much anything. It's one of these things where in the magical realm, there really are not any hard and fast rules here. It's just kind of like, it's one of these interesting things. And so again, after continuing to taunt Stephen Strange a little bit, Nightmare ultimately reveals his hand, right? Where Stephen Strange steps in and says, okay, look, like, will you wake up, man? Like, we've played out this scenario time and time again, and it always ends in your defeat. Every time you make some kind of a move and you try to put the world to sleep, which you've never really successfully did on this level before, but anytime you ever have a campaign like this, it always ends up with you being defeated. Why would this be any different? And the response of Nightmare is where he really kind of lets things loose, and he says, vanquishing your world was not the conclusion. Instead, it was the beginning. That the idea of Nightmare is on a much grander scale now, right? Nightmare has no intention of just conquering Earth, right? He has no intention of just conquering the main Marvel universe. Instead, Nightmare is setting his sights on the multiverse, on conquering every ounce of reality that is out there, and seemingly using Doctor Strange to do it. Now, here's the way that would most likely work. Stephen Strange is a universal character, right? I mean, he is the Sorcerer Supreme of the main Marvel universe, and every universe in the multiverse has its own Sorcerer Supreme, right? The Ultimate Universe has its version of Doctor Strange. Earth 98, which is where heroes age in real time, has its own version of Doctor Strange, its own Sorcerer Supreme. It may not necessarily be Stephen Strange, it might be somebody else, but every universe has its own Sorcerer Supreme. But the reality is that even in being a Sorcerer Supreme, you're not necessarily locked into your own universe, right? So it's not like Stephen Strange is the magical version of an Infinity Gauntlet, where all of his power and all of his abilities are confined to his one universe. He could leave the universe and go to an alternate reality, not just a different dimension, but go to an alternate reality and still be able able to manipulate his magic, right? That tether continues on into wherever it is that he's going because he's invoking the magic of others. It's not as though he opens that door to an alternate reality and when he shuts it, he's cut off to all the different magic that he has out there. It doesn't really work that way, but it's entirely possible that using Stephen Strange as a conduit, and because of the fact that he can reach out and affect different universes, that he's kind of a doorway here. Now, the question that has to be asked here is, how can Nightmare possibly move through Stephen Strange into other universes if there are other Sorcerer Supremes out there that could stop him? Well, the first answer to this is the fact that he's captured Stephen Strange, and pretty much all the characters who exist in the main Marvel universe are usually the most powerful versions of those characters. Occasionally you get different counterparts, but even if you look at like the Marquis of Death and Clyde Wincham originally debuted in an alternate reality story, but he became the Marquis of Death in the main Marvel universe. He's more powerful in the main Marvel universe, right? So that's usually kind of how it works in Marvel Comics. So if Nightmare can overpower Dr. Stephen Strange in the main Marvel universe, presumably he can overpower and take over anybody else. But the problem with this is that Stephen Strange's mind is racing, trying to understand how in the world he could possibly take out Nightmare, because he even kind of goes on and he says, like, it truly is a bad dream come to life. Nightmare has long been a dangerous foe, but now his power is beyond recognition. So in effect, the power of Nightmare has been amplified several times over, and not even Stephen Strange can fully understand how powerful he is. But the idea of Nightmare engaging in this action, putting the world to sleep, bolstering his abilities, and then setting his sights on conquering the universe, basically conquering all life throughout the universe, and then moving into the multiverse, does not go unnoticed. The first people to show up here are Ego the Living Planet, Galactus, and the Celestials. Here's the downside to this. As soon as they pop up, we never find out how this battle takes place, right? It's just the next thing you do is you cut to the fact that he's standing over them. That Nightmare has basically conquered Ego the Living Planet, he's conquered Galactus, and he's conquered the Celestials. Now, the truth about this is, on the surface, it might seem a little disappointing that we don't necessarily get to see this great big huge long drawn out fight, but the truth is that I think Nightmare being able to dispatch them and it not really being shown makes it a lot more significant, right? Because we've seen that happen before. We've seen that play out time and time again. Now, I know it's not much consolation here, right? I mean, because, you know, I personally would have loved to have seen an Alex Ross depiction of like a great big huge cosmic battle facing off against Nightmare and all that kind of stuff. If I'm being honest with you guys, I think the only reason why we're even seeing a story like this in Marvel Comics is because of WandaVision. The Nightmare's the one that's basically behind everything. But this is the important thing. It really even kind of blows the mind of Stephen Strange that Nightmare is of such a power level that he's able to overpower Galactus and the Celestials and all those guys. And so at that point, we basically end up having him kind of taunting Stephen Strange yet again, right? Taunting him and saying, like, any chance that you believe that you had here, any chance that you believe that you could somehow survive this, or you could somehow stop me and overpower me, it's non-existent here, right? Understand that there's nothing you can do. And so what this does is it leads to the next stage of cosmic entities getting involved. We get into the heavy hitters: Lord Chaos, Master Order, Eternity, the Living Tribunal, and even Mistress Death, right? These guys step in all with the intention of taking on Nightmare. And what happens? Nightmare overpowers every single one of them, just overpowers these guys. Now, this is where we're able to make the credible statement that Nightmare becomes the one above all, because the one above all is the one who created the Living Tribunal. And granted, there are other dimensional beings out there that are capable of destroying the Living Tribunal. For example, you look into something like the Beyonders or something along those lines. And while Nightmare is in and of himself not necessarily a being that is part of the traditional order of cosmic entities, he is by all standards of measurement, right? He's a cosmic abstract, right? He is a concept given a physical form. If dreams that we have as human beings, the collective subconscious of us when we dream, if it could get up and walk around, it would be Nightmare, right? That's basically the form that it would take. And so this is essentially an instance where a cosmic abstract has found a way to violate the natural order of things, bolster their power, and then in turn kill the Living Tribunal. Now, does this mean that we're going to see Nightmare take on the one above all? It's entirely possible, right? I'm not really sure yet, because this is basically the final issue or the second to the final issue. But it's one of these things where Stephen Strange kind of sees this, right? He says, like, at first I thought Nightmare simply wanted to conquer the waking realm. Now I realize he wants to drain the energy of every realm, be it earthly or metaphysical. If beings as powerful as these are helpless before him, then truly my plan has to succeed. I only hope that Nightmare remains preoccupied by his lust for power and by his fascination with the dreams of the living, right? Stephen Strange just kind of looks at that and says, okay, like we got one shot, right? And if I'm not able to pull off this one shot, then we're all going to be screwed. And so the way this basically ends is you have Nightmare kind of looking at this and saying, you know, Strange, I could do this forever, and perhaps I will. Perhaps I will crush your world into dust and you will watch it happen, secure in the knowledge that you made it possible for me to destroy everything that you fought to protect. The truth about this, and I'm going to be straight up with you guys, Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek, they're not the kind of guys who would do something like Jim Starlin where he just like invents the cosmic regulator and suddenly Thanos just becomes this omnipotent, ridiculously OP being. They're not the kind of guys to do that. Kurt Busiek, one, he's been writing comics since forever, right? Since like the 70s. And two, like Alex Ross has written and drawn quite a bit of comics, and he's got standards. And I doubt he would want to be part of a story where it's just kind of some hand-wavy ending. And so because of that, the plan of Stephen Strange is going to be something tangible. It's going to be something significant. Maybe it'll be the one above all. I'm not entirely sure, but whatever it is, it's got to be something, because what we're basically dealing with right here is the Lord of Nightmares who somehow managed to get the upper hand on every single cosmic entity up to and including the Living Tribunal. The only thing above that is the one above all. That's where the buck stops. So unless Stephen Strange has something insane up his sleeve, this is it. This is where it all ends. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.